My name is Caleb Whitfield, and I was standing in the lobby of First Heritage Bank when a teller called my name over the speaker, like I'd won something, except what I'd actually won was the truth. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been sitting at my parents' kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio, listening to my mother explain, very calmly, like she was reading a grocery list, that the $412,000 sitting in the account my grandfather left for my education had been transferred to my younger sister Madison for her wedding, for her fresh start, for her husband's failing car dealership that apparently needed a bridge loan from family. I want you to understand something before I go further. That money wasn't a gift. It wasn't something they'd saved up out of love. My grandfather, Earl Whitfield, had been a machinist for 41 years at a tool plant outside Dayton. And when he died, he left a trust specifically in my name, specifically for college, specifically because he used to tell me, every single Sunday at his kitchen table, that I was going to be the first Whitfield man to walk across a graduation stage in a cap and gown instead of steel-toed boots. He died when I was 16. The trust was supposed to release to me in full when I turned 25, with my parents as custodians until then, because that's how Earl set it up. He didn't trust banks alone, he trusted family, which in hindsight is the saddest part of this whole story. I turned 25 11 days before my mother told me the money was gone. "It's not gone, Caleb. It's just repurposed," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "Madison needed it more. You're doing fine. You've got your job." My job? I want to talk about my job for a second, because it matters more than you'd think. I worked as a financial analyst for a regional logistics company, making decent money, nothing spectacular. Living in a one-bedroom apartment in Dayton that smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes no matter how many candles I burned. I was not rich. I was not successful in the way my family measured success, which was loud, visible, Instagrammable success. Madison had that. Madison always had that. Madison was 2 years younger than me, and from the time she was maybe 9 years old, my parents treated her like she was made of porcelain and possibility, while I was treated like the load-bearing wall of the family, useful, expected to hold everything up, never celebrated for it. When I made the dean's list in college, my mother said, "That's nice," and changed the subject to Madison's cheerleading regionals. When Madison failed 2 semesters of community college and dropped out to find herself in Charleston, my parents took out a second mortgage to help her find herself more comfortably. So when my mother sat across from me at that kitchen table and told me Earl's trust, my trust, the one with my name on the original 2009 paperwork, the one I had watched grow on quarterly statements my whole life, had been liquidated and handed to Madison for her wedding and her husband's dealership, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just asked one question. How is that even legal? I'm 25. The trust was supposed to release to me automatically. My father, who had been silent the whole time, pretending to read the newspaper like we were living in 1987, finally looked up. We had it restructured. Lawyer said it was fine since we were still listed as co-trustees until the official release date paperwork went through. Technically, it hadn't released yet. Technically, I want you to sit with that word the way I had to sit with it for the next several weeks, because that word, technically, was the first crack in a wall I didn't even know was hiding something much bigger behind it. I left that house that night and drove around Dayton for almost 3 hours with no destination, just driving past the tool plant where my grandfather worked, past the cemetery where he was buried, past the high school where I used to tell people, half joking, half praying, that I was going to be somebody someday. I parked outside my apartment and sat in my car until 2 in the morning. And somewhere in that silence, something in me went cold and very, very still. Not sad. Sad was a few weeks earlier. This was something else. This was the kind of calm that comes right before you decide to stop being the person people walk over. The next morning, I called the one person who might actually know what technically hadn't released yet meant in legal terms. My college roommate Trevor Banks, who'd gone on to become a trust and estate attorney in Columbus. Trevor had always been sharp, the kind of guy who read terms and conditions for fun, and when I explained what happened, he went quiet on the phone, in a way that scared me more than yelling would have. "Caleb," he said slowly, "send me the original trust documents if you have any copies. Right now. Tonight, if you can. I did have copies. Earl, bless his meticulous machinist heart, had given me a manila folder when I turned 18 with instructions written in his own handwriting. For when you need it, not before. I'd never even opened most of it. I drove to my storage unit that same night and found the folder buried under old textbooks. And what I found inside it would become the first real twist in this story. Not the betrayal itself, but what the betrayal was actually hiding. Earl hadn't just left money for my education. He'd left a contingency clause, drafted by his own attorney back in 2009, that stated if the trust funds were ever withdrawn, transferred, or redirected for purposes outside of the named beneficiary's education without that beneficiary's written consent, the entire remaining estate, which included a separate account I had never known existed, a secondary investment account Earl had quietly built from patent royalties on a machine tooling design he'd sold to a manufacturing company back in the 90s, would automatically transfer in full to the named beneficiary, with the custodian's rights immediately and permanently revoked. I read that clause 4 times standing in a dusty storage unit at 11 at night before I understood what it meant. My parents hadn't just stolen from me. They had triggered a clause that, if Trevor was right, meant everything. Not just the $412,000, but a second account neither of us even knew the size of, was now legally, irrevocably, mine. Trevor called me back 2 days later, and his voice had a kind of controlled excitement that lawyers get when they smell a case they know they're going to win. "Caleb, I need you to brace yourself," he said. "I pulled records through a contact at the county clerk's office. That secondary account your grandfather mentioned. It's real. It's been sitting at First Heritage Bank under a holding trust since 2011. Your grandfather rolled patent royalty payments into it for years before he died. Caleb, this account is worth $1,100,000. And because of the contingency clause, your parents' withdrawal from the primary account just legally severed their custodial rights over both." I had to sit down on my kitchen floor. I'm not going to pretend I felt triumphant in that moment. I felt sick. I felt like the floor of my entire childhood had been pulled out from under me twice. In 2 weeks, once by the betrayal, and once by the realization that my grandfather, the quietest man I ever knew, had built a fortress around me that my own parents never even knew existed, because he never trusted them with it. But here's where the story gets more complicated, because revenge stories aren't satisfying if they're simple, and mine was not simple at all. I didn't tell my parents what I'd found. Not yet. Instead, I did something that I think surprised even Trevor. I asked him to help me legally and quietly secure the funds first, with zero public confrontation. No drama. Nothing. I wanted the money safe before anyone in my family knew I had leverage. Because I had learned one thing about my parents over 25 years. The moment they sense they're losing control of something, they scramble to destroy it before anyone else can have it. It took 6 weeks of paperwork, notarized affidavits, and one deposition where my mother, under oath, not realizing what was coming, admitted on record that she and my father had withdrawn the trust funds for Madison's benefit, with full knowledge that the official release date hadn't passed. That deposition is what set everything in motion. 3 days after it was filed, my mother showed up at my apartment, banging on the door like the building was on fire. "What did you do?" she screamed the moment I opened it. "The bank froze our accounts. Madison's wedding is in 5 weeks. Caleb, what did you do?" I want to be honest. There was a part of me, a small, ugly, human part of me, that felt something close to joy watching my mother's face when I calmly explained the contingency clause to her. Watching the exact moment it landed. Watching 25 years of being the invisible son crystallize into one sentence I'd been waiting my whole life to say. "I didn't do anything, Mum. Grandpa did. Years ago. You just never read the fine print." She went pale. She actually had to grab the doorframe. "That money was supposed to go to family," she said, voice cracking. "I am family," I said. "I was always family. You just never treated me like I was." She left without another word, and for a few days there was silence. The kind of heavy silence that feels like the air before a tornado. I should have known that silence wasn't peace. It was my family regrouping. Here's twist number 2, and this is the one that genuinely shook me, because I never saw it coming. 10 days later, I got a call from Madison herself. Not angry, not crying. Calm, almost rehearsed like she'd practiced the words in a mirror. "Caleb, I need to tell you something Mom and Dad don't know I know," she said. "And I think you deserve to hear it from me before the lawyers turn it into something ugly." She told me that the dealership her husband Tyler ran wasn't failing because of bad luck like my parents had told everyone. It was failing because Tyler had been siphoning company funds into a separate account for almost 2 years, funneling money toward a second life he was building in Florida, with a woman he'd met at a trade conference. A woman Madison had only found out about 3 weeks earlier, when a private investigator she'd secretly hired sent her photographs. The trust fund money, my trust fund money, hadn't gone to save the dealership. It had gone almost entirely toward paying off Tyler's secret debts so he could keep his double life financially afloat a little longer. All while my parents believed, or pretended to believe, they were rescuing their daughter's marriage. "I didn't know Caleb," Madison said, and for the first time in years, I heard something in her voice that didn't sound performative. "I swear to God I didn't know what he was doing with it. I thought it was for the dealership. I thought it was for us." I believed her. That's the part that complicates everything. Because as much as Madison had been the golden child my whole life, she had also been a victim in this story, in a way none of us anticipated. Manipulated by a husband who saw an opportunity in a family that already had a habit of moving money around for family emergencies, without asking questions. The wedding, by the way, never happened. Madison called it off 2 weeks before the freeze on the accounts even became public knowledge in our small social circle. Which meant by the time people started hearing whispers about the Whitfield situation, there were 2 scandals braiding together instead of one: my missing trust fund and Tyler's secret double life. And Dayton, Ohio, is a small enough town that whispers travel like wildfire through a dry field. This is where the public humiliation scene comes in, and I promise you I did not plan it. Life planned it for me. My father, in a desperate and frankly baffling attempt to fix the narrative, organised what he called a family meeting at Madison's in-laws country club, inviting extended family, a few of my parents' closest friends, even my Aunt Renee, who'd flown in from Tennessee, framing it as a chance to clear the air before things got blown out of proportion. What he actually wanted, I realised walking in, was an audience. He wanted witnesses who would see me as the villain, the bitter older son trying to destroy his own family over money, dragging his sister's failed marriage into the spotlight out of jealousy. He stood up in front of nearly 20 people in that country club dining room and said, almost theatrically, "Caleb has decided that money matters more to him than family. He's suing his own parents. His own sister's wedding fell apart because of this lawsuit." I remember the silence in that room. I remember feeling every eye turn toward me, waiting for me to either collapse in shame or explode in anger, because that's what they expected from the son who'd always absorbed things quietly. I did neither. I stood up, and in a voice that didn't shake, I told that room the truth. Not with anger, but with the same calm precision my grandfather used to use when he explained machinery to me as a kid, piece by piece, so even a child could understand exactly how something worked. I told them about the trust. I told them about the contingency clause. I told them, carefully, without naming Tyler directly out of some leftover protective instinct toward Madison, that the money taken from me hadn't gone toward saving a marriage. It had gone toward funding a betrayal none of them knew about yet. And then Madison, sitting at the end of the table, did something I will never forget as long as I live. She stood up too, and in front of everyone she said, "Tell them the rest, Dad. Tell them where the money actually went." My father's face went the colour of old paper. It turned out, and this became the third and biggest twist in the entire story. My father had known about Tyler's secret accounts for almost a year before any of this came out. He discovered it accidentally while helping Tyler with paperwork for the bridge loan, found bank statements showing transfers to an account in Tyler's name alone, and instead of warning Madison, instead of stopping the trust fund withdrawal, he'd buried it, terrified that exposing Tyler would unravel the wedding, the family image, the story he'd been telling everyone for years about his perfect, golden daughter. My father had known, and he let me lose everything anyway, to protect an image that was already rotting from the inside. The country club dining room that had been silent a moment earlier erupted into something between gasps and furious whispering, and I watched 20 years of my parents' carefully constructed reputation collapse in real time in public, the way they'd always feared it would, except they'd caused it themselves trying to humiliate me. I left that night without saying another word. There was nothing left to say that the room hadn't already heard. Here's where the story takes the turn that brings us back to where I started. Naim. The bank lobby, my name called over a speaker, the moment that should have felt like vindication, but instead felt like something far heavier. The lawsuit settled out of court 4 months later. My parents, facing not just the original contingency clause, but mounting pressure from extended family, who now knew the full story, agreed to a settlement that returned every dollar of the original $412,000, on top of the $1 million already legally mine through Earl's secondary account, structured through First Heritage Bank, under Trevor's careful guidance. The day I went in to finalise the transfer and close out the trust accounts permanently, the branch manager, a soft-spoken woman named Diane Okafor, who had handled my grandfather's accounts for over a decade, called me into her office. And that's the moment this story actually opens with. My name over the speaker, my legs feeling strange beneath me. 25 years of being underestimated, finally crystallising into a number on a piece of paper. But Diane told me something that day I hadn't expected, and it's the kind of detail that makes you realise how little you ever truly know about the people who shape you. She told me my grandfather used to come into that branch every single month for years, quietly, never telling anyone, and ask how the account was performing. Not the trust, the secondary one. The secret one. And every single time, he'd say the same thing to her. That's for Caleb. He doesn't know it exists yet, and that's exactly how I want it. Let him build his own life first. This is just so nobody can ever take everything from him. Earl Whitfield had built me a parachute years before I knew I'd need one, because somewhere in his quiet machinist's heart, he must have understood exactly what kind of family he was leaving me in. I used a portion of that money to do something my parents never imagined I would. I didn't buy a house, didn't buy a car, didn't disappear into luxury out of spite. I started a small scholarship fund through the same community college Madison had once dropped out of, named after my grandfather, specifically for first-generation students whose families couldn't or wouldn't support their education. It felt like the only way to make Earl's secret money mean something bigger than my own anger. As for Madison, she filed for divorce within the month. Tyler lost the dealership entirely once the embezzlement came to light, and last I heard, he was facing fraud charges in 2 states. Madison and I aren't close. Not the way some families repair themselves in movies, but she calls sometimes now, just to talk. And last Christmas she sent me a card that said simply, "I'm sorry I let them use both of us." I keep that card in the same manila folder Earl gave me because I think he would have wanted it there. A record of what surviving a family actually costs and what it gives you back if you're patient and quiet enough to wait for the truth to surface on its own. My parents and I speak maybe twice a year now. Brief, careful conversations that never go below the surface because some things, once revealed, can't be unrevealed. And some trust, once technically withdrawn, never technically comes back. I think about my grandfather almost every day now, not with sadness anymore, but with a strange, steady gratitude, because he understood something about our family that none of us were willing to admit out loud. That love in our house had always come with conditions, and money had always come with strings, except his. His came with one simple, unbreakable rule, written into law instead of just spoken out loud, because he knew words alone would never be enough to protect me. And maybe that's the part of this story that stays with me the most. Not the lawsuit, not the public unravelling at that country club, not even the number on the bank statement that changed my life. It's the realisation that the people who are supposed to protect you the most can sometimes be the ones you need the most protection from, and that real love, the kind that actually holds up under pressure, doesn't announce itself at family dinners or wedding toasts. Sometimes it just sits quietly in a bank account for 15 years, waiting, patient and silent, for the one moment you'll finally need it to speak louder than everyone who ever doubted you.